My name is Ruprecht von Kaufmann. I'm a painter and I live in Berlin, Germany. I don't really remember when I started expressing myself through painting and drawing, because pretty much as long as I can remember and that I can hold a pencil, I've been always drawing and spending most of the day doing that. So it's always been my medium to express the way I feel about the world, see the world. Why do I still do it today? Well, I mean, you know, it's essentially the most beautiful work I can imagine, and it's from the moment that I realized that painting could be a profession for me, something I do to make a living. My goal has been to be a professional painter and to make a living off of it. So it's essentially a dream being able to do that. So essentially, you know, I've been drawing and painting all my life. It's kind of something that felt as natural as breathing almost to me. But that also led to the weird situation that when I finally was close to graduating high school, I didn't even think about that it could be a profession, right? Like it was just something you did as a hobby, and it didn't even occur to me that you could be a professional painter. Part of the reason for that is also that at the time there wasn't any figurative or representational painting, or almost none, in Germany, and abstract and conceptual art didn't interest me all that much. So I wanted to become something completely different. I wanted to become a veterinarian instead. And then my dad actually talked me into, yeah, you know, like you seem to have like this creative talent, why don't you look into becoming a graphic designer? So I heard about this American school that I had, like a campus in Switzerland at the time, art center, and I applied there, started as a graphic designer, then stumbled across their catalog and saw that on the LA campus they offered illustration as a major, and I'm like, ooh, this is nice, this is much more what I really want to do. So I reapplied for illustration in LA, got taken, moved to LA, and there, like a lot of the teachers that were teaching in our illustration department were painters themselves. So they sort of like encouraged me, telling me like, yeah, you know, like you always seem to be coming up with your own stories anyway. You never seem to be following the story that the illustration demands. Why don't you just try become a painter? And following the slippery slope theory from then on, that's what I became. Let's put it this way, like I think for me, like art in the best sense is a form of communication with somebody else that is independent from space and time, and if you even know that person. So what I mean with that is that, you know, I can go to a museum and I can look at a Rembrandt painting and I can get a feel for his frame of mind, like how he moved in front of the canvas. And at the same time, if you, for example, you know, listen to a certain piece of music and the lyrics really strike you and the music really touches you, it can talk about your life at the time, and it can give you the sense that there's like a kindred spirit, even though you might never have met the artist and will never meet the artist who made the song, right? And I think that's, in a certain sense, something super, super beautiful. So essentially that's what I try to create in my paintings, that when a viewer sees them, that it becomes at the very least an emotional experience, that it triggers something in them that touches them and maybe then leads them to reflect more on the world, on their lives, their role in the world. And I think that's also something that for me is something that I think is important when you encounter an artwork or a painting of mine, say, that it makes you rethink the way you see the world. right? So like in my paintings, even though they're representational, I try to usually depict a world that's recognizable, but at the same time slightly different and slightly doesn't fit. And by doing that, it, in the best case, makes you question certain paradigms that we at our time consider to be the truth, but that might just be our time. So, you know, at a certain time in my lifetime, like when I was a baby, it was completely normal to take a baby and just put it on the back seat and drive off in a car. If you did that today, like people would be looking at you like you're completely, like a complete lunatic and completely irresponsible, right? So the paradigm for what we consider to be rational behavior has completely changed. So what we consider rational behavior can be, you know, just sort of like an expression of our times. And so I usually try to look for a way to paint something to make us question, okay, like, is this really normal how we behave? I think my overall thesis is that human behavior is completely strange and unpredictable and very hard to understand, and motivations why people act the way they act are sort of sometimes strange and unpredictable. And it's sort of like the puzzlement about how humans can be so contradictory, right? Like they can be extremely rational and extremely irrational at the same time. They can be extremely tender, gentle, creative, amazing, and at the same time brutal, ignorant, and completely insane. And yeah, I just find it really interesting, and I think because I'm by nature more of an introvert, so human connections aren't that natural to me. I think it's this project of observing people and trying to understand how they tick is sort of my central thesis. Yeah, naturally there's I think a ton of stuff that you learn after your formal schooling in the studio, just working as an artist and trying to fend for yourself as an artist. I'm not like a, well, that's this way, like I think it's crucially important to go to art school, and I recommend that to most people who ask me, like, yeah, you know, do you think I should even go to an art school? Isn't that just like a big waste of time? I don't think it is, because it gives you like a time window where you can explore, try to start to figure out who you are as an artist. And it's sort of like a safe spot where you don't have to justify everything you do yet to the world. But at the same time, I think it's, you know, there's some people who then hide in that safety zone. And I think just going out into the world and trying to fend for yourself as an artist, try to defend what you're doing as an artist to the world is already like a very valuable lesson. And I think what a lot of young artists often misunderstand is starting out, that they think, okay, you know, like I've studied now, I've discovered more or less already everything about being an artist, and I need to find like my style, and then I just pull through with that to the very bitter end. And I think, you know, finishing or graduating art school and then starting to work as an artist, that's just the very first step and the very beginning of a very, very long journey of exploration. And I think the most difficult part really is to keep that whole thing alive and to keep it interesting and lively and exciting for a longer period of time. And that can never happen if you just take the style that you thought you had when you were an art student and pull through with it till the very bitter end. Because you're gonna get bored with yourself like crazy. There were several points where I was very close to being broke, and where I said, like, okay, like if something doesn't happen, I can't sell like something fairly soon, I will have to go out and look for some other work, and maybe I call it quits with art. And there have been also points in time where I was so fed up with the art world itself and the commercial side of the arts that I was very close to saying, like, okay, I don't want this anymore. But then at the same time, it's just such a wonderful privilege to be in the studio every day and paint and work on your paintings, and that part is so delightful that like I've always stuck with it. Well, I mean, I think teaching and being an artist, to me, it sort of always goes hand in hand, right? Like it's baked almost in the very earliest traditions of painting that most painters in early stages of art history had painting studios where they were also teaching young new artists how to become an artist and how to become a painter. So you read that in pretty much every biography of every famous Renaissance painter, like in which studio they've learned painting and how they were educated in art. So I think it's an essential part of this, of being a painter and the whole art experience. And then I personally really enjoy it. I like working with students. I like trying to think my way into their shoes to find out, okay, like what could help a person at that particular point in their career and their development as a painter, and what could I say to them that might help them along on their road. And then, especially teaching at universities, I think that in a society like ours that is so, let's say, focused on making money and that something is worth amount X of money, that we have still stuff like art universities and art schools where people are being educated as artists is just so wonderful. So I really enjoy being in art schools and around students and seeing people who are just starting to discover painting for themselves and are super excited and super happy to develop skills and to learn things. Yeah, it's just a really fun experience. I think it varies and it depends a little bit on each particular person, because there's people who are very natural born promoters or self-promoters, and then there's people who aren't that much. Usually, like I find in the painting world, people aren't as much natural born self-promotion animals. So to those people I usually try to make them understand that it's very important that you promote your work and you take it seriously and you are able to represent it to the world well. And I think that includes, and that is something I find with almost every art student I've encountered, they have one of the things that they struggle most with is talking about their work in a cohesive, interesting manner. And that is something that is very, very hard to do, I think. But at the same time, it's crucially important to learn that. And I think most art schools kind of neglect that to the great disadvantage of the students, that they don't teach them how to talk about their work properly. So one aha moment, and I don't remember which professor that was, but like that definitely stuck in my mind for a very long time, or like I still think about it now often, is that he said, like, don't ever be so arrogant as to think that you're the only person in the world who will think something is interesting or beautiful or cool. So even if you get a lot of negative feedback on something you've created, there surely is somebody in the world who will also share your fascination for it and also find it interesting. And the core of that is essentially that you just need to find your audience, like a matching audience to your work that will be able to appreciate your work, especially in the beginning. I mean, like, you know, like once you've sort of established a certain amount of reputation for yourself, maybe you're a bit more immune from that. But I think, you know, you can never please everybody and make stuff that everybody likes. But if you find the right kind of audience that shares your vision or can connect to your vision, then that's the thing you need to do. Yeah, I've been always like a big fan of oil paint, and I mean, I really like the aspect that it takes a longer time to dry, so it leaves you time to change your mind. And since one of the particulars of my painting style is that I don't use any models or photo references, like everything is sort of invented and worked from invention. It's usually like a sort of communication with my canvas or my panel, where I'm searching for the forms that then trigger in my mind, like, oh yeah, like this feels right, like it triggers the right kind of emotions, the right kind of memories, the right kind of associations. And that's, I think, essentially how representational painting works, right? Like, because in essence, it's just a little bit of colored mud on a surface. But if it's arranged in the right kind of way, like in the brain of the viewer, it triggers certain memories, certain things that we recognize, right? Like our brain always looks for shapes that we recognize. So it's, you know, the magic really happens in the brain of the viewer, where all of a sudden, like, these shapes start to make sense and come together as recognizable forms. But this process for me needs like the time of being able to correct oneself or to scrape paint out. Yeah, and for that oil paints are ideal. Plus I love the texturalness of oil paints. Oil paints usually dry with a lot more visible brush stroke than acrylic paints. So, and that's something I'm really looking for. So for me, paintings are more or less reliefs, very flat ones, but they're reliefs, like objects. That's why they are consciously also made, that they're like, these panels are lifting off the wall a little bit, so they're flying in front of the walls. And then for the last 12 years or so, 13 years now, I've been working on linoleum panels. So the surface isn't canvas, but it's linoleum that I paint on. And since linoleum is 80% linseed oil, yeah, like acrylic paints wouldn't really stick lastingly to that surface. I mean, like, here's like, you know, like a whole drawer full with brushes that I used. Pretty cheap ones, generic ones from one of the European art shops, house brand sort of. You can see, like, most of them are, you know, relatively big. These ones here I hardly ever use, like the smaller ones, and the same is true for, like, there's another drawer with round brushes. And you can see like the smaller ones are hardly touched and the bigger ones are mostly used up already. So the reason why I'm, using these fairly cheap brushes is because I like the way they handle, and I like to be just able to throw away a brush like when it's too worn out. So I swap them out relatively quickly. Yeah, and I also believe in rather using like a larger brush and trying to make like a decisive mark than kind of with 1,000 million little tiny brush strokes trying to come up with something that eventually falls together as a painting. So the catalyst to start using that is really chance. I think chance plays a big role anyway in art and creativity. So the story how I stumbled across a linoleum is really that, like in our kitchen, in our private space, like we were putting in new floors, and it was supposed to be a linoleum floor, and they have all kinds of colors that you can use. So we ordered color samples, and they're like about these pieces of linoleum that big. And because we had trouble making up our minds what would be a good color, like we had in the end like a stack of this high of linoleum samples that were flying around the flat upstairs for quite a while. And then one day my wife came into the studio and she said like, oh yeah, like can't you do something with these? Which is usually just code speak for somebody should bring this to the dump. So first I was like a little bit annoyed that the stuff has been dumped in my studio, but then I thought to myself, well, like this could be actually like interesting to try and paint on this, because you can also carve into it, and there's lots of crazy stuff one could do with it. So I started on this series where I would do, on these linoleum samples, every week I would do like a little invented portrait where I would just experiment with the material and what it could do and how it behaves, and carving into it and the various colors that you could get. So I ordered like, tons of these color samples and did for a whole year. I did like a series every week. So it's really 56 paintings that came out of that. And then after that, like I was kind of hooked, and I looked for ways to do larger paintings on linoleum as well. And that was also like a little bit a longer process to find the right kind of materials, because linoleum, it's a very durable material once it's mounted on a surface, but in itself, like, it being linseed oil, it will get harder and harder and more brittle. So if it's not mounted on a rigid surface, eventually it will just break. So that's like the most difficult part about it. And a ton of people, like when they find out like I'm working on linoleum, like they ask me like, oh yeah, like I want to do that too. But I usually tell them like, I don't do it if you don't really feel it's crucial to your work and like how you paint and how you express yourself with paint, because it's very impractical in real art world terms, right? Like the paintings are very heavy, so painting like this like weighs like 30 kilos, so 15 pounds, and this is about the size that I can comfortably still hang myself. Anything above that, like you need like a second person to help you hang them. Shipping to overseas, like the States or Asia, becomes extremely expensive. So yeah, and you always need a crate, you can't roll them. You need a transport frame, because all this here is sensitive and can break off, and it's not really the most easy and practical material to work with. I always thought that paintings, to me, they are objects, right? Like they're like three-dimensional things, and in that way they differ a lot from photography. And I always feel that they sort of go into the space. So I wanted to have like a support that makes the painting feel like it's coming off the wall. So it's not part of the wall, or less so than actually part of the space that we inhabit as the viewer. So that's why these are mounted the way they are. And I like also the idea that even though the paintings in reality are really heavy, like when you look at them, and because the frame that it's mounted on is sort of set back from the edges, it seems like it's hovering in front of the wall rather than it's hanging on the wall. So it has like a different sensibility than for example, like a canvas, or where you can see the thickness, the full thickness of the piece. And then it also has like something to do with stability. So like when you mount the linoleum with glue to the surface of the panel can warp. So the frame is also part of a structure that keeps it from warping and keeps it nice and straight. You order linoleum in rolls, so it comes in rolls that are like 2 meters in height, so slightly above my head. And usually like the minimum you have to order is like 5 meters if you order it new. So you get like these rolls that are also very, very heavy, and then also fairly expensive. It's definitely more expensive than canvas as a surface. It's pretty much all I do now. Yeah, like I've thought several times to maybe that it would be practical to do work on canvas again, but like there's so many aspects that I would miss working on canvas. Like one of them being that it's a rigid surface, and it changed my painting style a lot. My painting style has gotten a lot more aggressive and almost violent, because you can work with a lot more pressure on a rigid surface than you can on a canvas, right? Like on a canvas, if you put too much pressure, you instantly get like the stretcher bars that are visible on the front as something that comes through. This doesn't happen with linoleum panels, and partially like erasing parts again, scraping out parts of a painting again and restarting them has become like super crucial to the way of work, which is also much harder to do with canvas. And I like the surface because it's smooth, but it has a certain kind of texture. So the way the linoleum takes the paint is just what I find very, very ideal for my type of painting and how I work. Well, I mean, like with everything with painting, like to a certain degree, it is. They are sometimes intuitive decisions, but sometimes also very conscious decisions. Conscious in the sense that I'm really interested in building up textures and layers and a surface that has depth to it, because you know, like for me, like when I think about a painting, it's never. It never feels like working on a two-dimensional surface. For me, it's always like working in space. So even putting down a brush stroke that might just be the outline of a figure, I'm always thinking that I'm actually outlining something three-dimensional. So that makes like to me, makes a big difference. And, you know, thinking about carving into a painting or collaging something onto it has a different conceptual feel, or says something different. Like if you take this painting, for example, it's a painting about, like, this mountain actually exists on the Zugspitze, which is like a mountain close to where I grew up. It's the highest mountain in Germany, and one almost has to say there used to be glaciers up there, pretty big ones, and they're pretty much completely disappeared. So here in the painting, where the former glacier used to be, it's just cut out. So it's literally missing and lost, right? So it's going into the surface there. Versus part of the figures, they're kind of more collaged on, emphasizing that they're just like I've guessed in that environment something that's just temporary and on top of it and not naturally part of that environment. So emphasizing that we humans are kind of going away from nature more and more. I still do printmaking and I still do lino cuts as well, yeah. But more or less just for fun, like it's not, in my experience, or like for me, prints rarely sell very well, and so it's more or less just something I do for my own pleasure. Like I do a lot of preparatory work in forms of sketches, usually, especially composition. And that's maybe another piece of advice I often give young painters, that it's super important to get the composition right first. Because if you start with like a bad composition, you can paint the most beautiful figures in the world and in the best detail that you can, but it's still going to be a lousy painting because the basic structure doesn't work. And that's something I had to learn kind of the hard way, with failing a lot with that. And now, like, I do think a lot about what the composition is supposed to be like before I start a painting. Let's put them there on the... So here, for example, you can see on that page that there have been various compositions, like the first one there, that I've been playing with in ideas. Then just kind of doodling around with trying to figure out poses or work out certain ideas where I'm looking for certain figures. Also here, you know, figures, working out figures more, putting them into a context of a composition. But you can tell that I'm, you know, very often right away try to introduce sort of like the rectangle of what the painting's later supposed to be like. Right, like you can see, it's all kinds of variations on various poses, on various, trying to look for the right kind of expression in a certain idea. I mean, like you can tell from the size of this one that this is mainly like my studio one, like where I'm consciously sitting down and looking for ideas, and oftentimes it just starts with sketching out stuff. Sometimes sketches never get used. This one I took into a completely different painting a lot later. This is just kind of searching for ideas, searching for various options to express certain ideas. And it goes on and on like this. Yeah, but I mean, like these are like, you know, it's sort of like in development, right? Like there's like this figure being introduced and looking through various things where it's kind of leaning over to hold another figure, and then it has like this one in here, and I'm sure like the horse, so it's kind of like taking this, you know, like a Napoleon-like figure, but it's instead of him riding the horse is sort of like pressing him down. And I'm sure there's somewhere that they often are not in the same spot, but there's another one like where similar to these figures, right? Like we've also had like a single figure that they're put into the context of like a rectangle. So searching for how do I place this into a composition that it makes sense and that it works. So it usually comes back to that, right? Like it's obviously working out poses and looking for various, playing around with variation on a pose, but then there's like this figure, you know, like it was meant right away to be put into the context of a composition. And that composition also is like redone, right? So there's like the compositional idea, and then playing around with how this figure could be looking like in detail. So it's always like a going back and forth between, looking for interesting poses, looking for figures, and then trying to put them into a context of a composition again. Yeah. I mean, those are down here. These are the carving tools. They're just normal, regular type linoleum knives, or wood for wood printing, right? Just regular stuff. There's also these sets where you can change just the tips. They're a lot cheaper, but they don't last quite as long as these more expensive types here. And then, just different sizes, forms. Yeah, I've done printmaking with linoleum, but not that much. And it wasn't all that much the idea of printing really that I found that got me to cut into it, but found the idea really interesting to sort of destroy the surface, right? Like to really play with the surface of the painting, and to take a knife and cut into it, or with the ones that you've seen in the exhibition that's currently up, right? Like I've taken a drill and drilled holes into it, and there's somewhere taken like a rotary saw and just cut into the surface, like lines that ripped out like the linoleum, that kind of thing. Like I love messing with it and taking sort of like the preciousness of the surface and questioning that, right? Yeah, so I mean, like the ones in the exhibition here in Berlin, they were done to that theme of an imagined dialogue with the German artist Otto Dix 100 years ago, and the idea behind it was sort of that I found it a little bit frightening and, let's say, peculiar that 100 years after Otto Dix made his paintings about the Weimar Republic, we're confronted with a lot of similar political problems and situations, from the rich and poor kind of ever increasingly drifting apart from each other in society, people thinking that, like democracy, like who really needs democracy, like what's wrong with a little bit of a cool dictatorship, like as long as it's, in my favor, could be cool, quick decision making, it's nice. Up to that, people, I think in the 1920s, they knew that they had reached the end of an era, right? Like technology was developing rapidly, industrialization was kind of like supercharged, and especially for Germans, like coming out of the trauma of World War I, and having been an empire, all of a sudden trying to be a democracy, like it was sort of like a change of eras. And I think we're also like at a point where we can feel like, okay, like some kind of era has found an end, and has to be something new, or will be something new, right? Like I think the fossil fuel economy is, we can all kind of feel is sort of on its very last leg, and something will come after it. Or if we don't manage to change, the world is going to be at least a very, very different one, right? So we will be forced to change one way or the other, because then we will have to become reactionary. So there are all these similarities, and that was sort of like the theme with this series of paintings, that it's like this, a dialogue almost with Otto Dix, like what did you see back then? What do I observe now as an artist living today in Berlin? And what is similar, what is different? And so And because Otto Dix was doing like a lot of these street scenes, people in the street, portraits, people in their houses, people in their living spaces, character studies of people that you find in Berlin, that's what you see in that exhibition. That's what I focused on. But that's not necessarily always what I paint. Like I do sometimes very kind of more crazy, fanciful, fantasy-based scenes that don't have that much connection to reality. Well, these ones here are like part of a series of paintings that I've also coming back to quite frequently that have to do with the relationship of human beings to nature and how we perceive our role in nature, that we feel like we're kind of disconnected from it and we can manipulate it at will, and not realizing that we're actually really part of it and we're depending on it just as much as any other creature in nature. I'm just about to start now on a new body of work for an exhibition this time in a year. So usually like exhibitions are about a year in preparation. And since the last exhibition that just opened a couple of weeks ago was super intense, both in preparation as in the hanging and installation of it. Like I haven't really had time to kind of come back to the studio and settle down and find a new theme. And usually like I need like a kind of like a red thread for an exhibition. Kind of like almost like a theme, right? Like so all the paintings have something that they have in common and that connects them in a way, sort of like an author starting a new book. So and at the moment I'm not quite sure what that theme is yet.